So good morning. It's really so good to be here and to see you all out here today. This is a great treat for me to be on the other coast. I spend most of my time on the East Coast, which is fine, but it's special to be this far from home and to see people of goodwill coming out on a Sunday morning for an ethical culture meeting. So it's really great from my point of view. So I'm going to be talking about the American Ethical Union, which, as John said, is the Federation of Ethical Societies. And just to know about us, we're kind of the societies own the Ethical Union, right? And so it's our members that come together to figure out where we're going and who we are and what we're about. One of the things that we do to try to get things well prepared is to make sure we have lots of conversations with people in ethical societies so that when we do actually come together, we have something to talk about already, right? So that we're not starting from scratch with our conversations every time. So today what I'd like to do is share a little bit about some of the historical ways that the ethical movement has been involved with the world around us, but also to talk a little bit more about what's happening in the contemporary time so that we can kind of get on a similar page here. So when the first ethical society began in 1876, its founder, Felix Adler, proclaimed in his founding address that the ethical society would work to lay the foundations of a mighty moral edifice. That sounds grand, doesn't it? Here's a few excerpts from that address. It will be the object of the lecturers, which is people like me, the lecturers to set forth a standard of duty, to discuss our practical duties in the practical present, to make clear the responsibilities which our nature as moral beings imposes upon us in view of the political and social evils of our age. It is my dearest object to exalt the present moment above the strife of contending sects and parties, and at once to occupy that common ground where we may all meet, believers and unbelievers, for purposes in themselves lofty and unquestioned by any. Not something that we notice today is a need, I'm sure. Believe or disbelieve as ye list, we shall at all times respect every honest conviction, but be one with us where there is nothing to divide in action. Diversity in the creed, unanimity in the deed. We are aiding and laying the foundations of a mighty edifice, whose completion shall not be seen in our day, no, nor in centuries upon centuries after us. But happy are we indeed if we can contribute even the least towards so high a consummation. The time calls for action. Up then, and let us do our part faithfully and well. That's 1876. Felix Adler was 25 years old when he gave that address. And he was quick to put his youthful energy to work. 1877 saw the first free kindergarten in the United States, the district nursing service, and the tenement house building company all started in 1877. Many of the ethical movement's most cherished accomplishments began with the efforts of the New York Society that was started in 1876. The Workingmen's School, which later became the Ethical Culture Schools, the Child Study Association, Hudson Guild, Camp Madison Felicia, National Child Labor Commission, the Civil Liberties Bureau actually getting its start out of the New York Society effort. And meanwhile in Chicago, the Bureau of Justice and the Women and Children's Protective Agency merged to become the Legal Aid Society. The World Congress of Religion was established there, and they also had a hand in the Henry Blue Settlement House and the Chicago Urban League founding. So there are a lot of things going on in the early years of the ethical culture movement to get many important things started that we still cherish today. And that continued in terms of trying to find more ways to connect with a broader world. So the Summer School for Ethics. How many people, by the way, have gone to the Lay Leadership Summer School that the union has provided? Oh, good number of people. All right. Well, there's a precursor to this in the late 1800s. 1891 it started as a School of Applied Ethics in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and later moved to Wisconsin. And it was under the direction of Anna Garland Spencer, who was the first woman to be an ethical culture leader. And what they were doing is looking to help the education system become humanized and ethicized. So they were working lots with administrators and educators, trying to help them figure out how to interact with children in such a way that the children's best qualities would be emerging through the course of their studies. And so they had all this cutting edge stuff that they were providing for educators at the time. 1946 was the start of Encampment for Citizenship, bringing youth together from all over the United States and other parts of the world as well. That was hosted by Algernon Black, and had as its key sponsor Eleanor Roosevelt. So we've had a number of important projects and many interesting things that we've done. But you may notice it's been a little while since we've done something this cool and sexy, right? And you wonder, there's bound to be reasons for that, right? And there's bound to be wonders, how come that happened then and is not happening now in the same kind of way? Quite frankly, things are pretty different now than they were then, right? And so, one thing you say is, truth of the matter is, they started all these organizations. The organizations persist. You don't need to start the same organization again, right? So, in some respects, you have a more crowded field to work with. But I think there's a deeper question here, which is, what is it that the world needs from us right now? What does the world need from us that we're in a position to help provide? And that's a question I think we need to be answering right now. But let's step back a little bit further just to, kind of refresh where things were then so that we have an understanding of why it was able to happen that way and compared to how things are now, so we can get a better handle on what we need to be doing going forward. Last night we had a longer conversation about ethical culture and what it is, and in the preparation for that I came upon this description of what were characteristic of the Enlightenment values that were precursors to when the first ethical society started. I'm going to share that with you because it's important to note that our culture has gone through so many changes in a pretty short period of time. And that really does make a difference in terms of how we go forward with life, right? So, the Enlightenment was like this, late 16th, 17th, and early 18th century, I guess, primarily. And during that time, there was a diminishing ecclesiastical authority over politics, right? So going in the early 1800s, it was churches that ran all the schools, ran all the medical facilities, etc., right? And it was only in the 1800s that you started having more voluntary organizations springing up and less things that were connected to churches, right? Converting government from autocracy to technique. Remember, this is the birth of the nation, right? With the democratic structures, but before that you had a king. Elimination of supernatural entities and processes from the metaphysics of social theory. So instead of wondering, what was God's will that produced this particular kind of thing that we're looking at, what were the things going on in nature, right, that will help us explain what we're seeing, right, that will become more of the issue. And with all these things also came some other notions that became important to us. So one was a stronger emphasis upon human action. Instead of looking at human beings as just being kind of the victims of whatever the divinity or the natural world was promoting, there was this sense that human beings had agency and had the capacity to affect their world in a stronger way than used to be thought of, right? And that practical activity and utility in the physical sphere then were more important. And so there's more of a focus on action over contemplation, more on pragmatism over dogmatism. And so these are the kind of things that figured into the early years of the Ethical Society, where we were talking about deed before creed, where we said, the thing you've got to get out there and change the conditions of people's lives in such a way that they could have enough food to eat, they could have enough money to pay their rent and those sorts of things. So there's much more of an emphasis on kind of the physical aspects of people being able to then do the other sorts of higher order things that we're looking for in terms of the ethics and how people behave, et cetera, et cetera. But with that came also a whole new notion that kind of undermined the sense that people had a responsibility and a duty to do things. So once you have evolution coming forward, and some of the thinking about that, where instead of people being created by a being who had a plan for them and a direction for them and requirements of them, you have more of a sense that things were happening without direction. And they may be good things, they may not be good things, but they're just happening because random things occurred, and those elements that were more successful in the environment stayed, and those that were less successful went away. Well, this is kind of at odds with the notion of having an ethical responsibility, right? Having a sense that you are required to do things in accordance with rules and regulations. And so the early leaders had more of a sense that there was, in fact, if you could see it, an underlying moral structure that you could dig into. So this is a moral law, almost like the law of gravity or something along those lines. And so they were able to look at that as a way to help people imagine if you could see how this worked, you would be kind of inclined to do good things for each other and to work towards the good, because you saw this as some of the way the world worked. But as that became less clear, I think they had to start looking for other kind of motivations for how people decide to do good things. And so the pieces that seem to have the best likelihood of being drivers of ethical behavior these days would be more along the lines of compassion and fairness. These are two elements that, as organisms, we are very well equipped to notice and to work with. All right. So on the compassion end, people that don't have any relationships, any connections with other people, don't actually become real people, right? Think about it. You grow up in a setting with caretakers, and you become a caretaker yourself. You have friends and family, coworkers, etc. All of that culture is often what helps you become the person that you are and maintain the person that you are, right? If you take away all those relationships, it's one of those reasons solitary confinement is so damaging for people. You take away those relationships, and people lose their sense of self. They don't have a place to be within all of it, right? And it's the compassion, it's that sense of connection that we have with each other that can kind of bring us forward and can motivate us to be treating people with respect and kindness and closeness, because we want to maintain the relationship. We care whether a person is suffering or not, so that will help us move forward. The other likely motivator is fairness, that we're really highly attuned to fairness. Anyone here a sibling? You have brothers and sisters? Were you always treated the same? Were you fair? Was it fair? Were your parents fair with you? No? Okay. All right. So you already sense it already, right? My favorite example of this, by the way, comes from Frans de Waal's work with primates. I don't know if people have ever seen the video of this. I was working with capuchin monkeys, and for those people who hate the idea of animal experimentation, I get it. But I can't help stop from watching this and being really taken by it. So he has these two capuchin monkeys in side-by-side cages, and they're doing behavioral things with them. So the first monkey will do a task, and he'll reward it, right? And they're used to doing this, so they're fine with it. So the monkey does the task, he gives us some cucumbers, all good. Does the task again, gives us some cucumbers, still good. The next monkey, he does the task, and he gives it grapes. Monkeys can distinguish between grapes and cucumbers as things of value. And it turns out grapes are much more highly prized than cucumbers. And so the first monkey is approached again to do the task and does it, and is presented with cucumbers. Well, there's obviously diversion and pay here for the same work. And the monkey starts getting upset, right? So he tries again to do it again. And to reward with cucumbers, the monkey's shaking the cage, he takes a cucumber, he's thrown it back. At a very primal place, we notice when we're not being treated fairly. Right? It's really deep within us. And we can see that the motivations that come out of these two different aspects, compassion and fairness, are also kind of different, right? When you think of compassion, you think of your heart breaking for someone, feeling of connection and your warm wanting to be tied. And when you're thinking of fairness, you're probably thinking about punching somebody in the head, right? Because it gets your anger up and your sense of outrage going forward. Ethical culture likes to work with both of those things, right? Because on the one end, it's possible really to be compassionate, but to not really do a whole lot about it. The downside of compassion is it's a motivator that motivates very nicely for people that you're intimate with, but it may kind of drop off when you're faced with people that you don't care about so much, for instance. Whereas on the fairness end, that's the kind of thing to get your dander up about even people that you don't know. Right? How many people voted in November? Did you have a feeling about the distinction between the popular vote and the electoral count? Right? You can feel upset about that, and you can feel upset about, and you can kind of get people's upset about that really easily, right? And it's easy for us to get connected if we can get in touch with that sense of fairness, and to get in touch with the sense that the fairness really needs to be spread out more. Right? That the problem is, in many cases, that there's an unevenness, and that some people are privileged and other people lack that privilege and suffer accordingly. So figuring out how to get those things built into our system, though, becomes a bit of a complication, right? Because if you're in an age when people aren't into duty, nobody wants to be told what to do. Right? Nobody wants to be told to think this way, to go this place, right? We don't like it, we don't need it. And quite frankly, we don't have to do what people tell us anymore. Right? It's very rare that you are in a situation where we actually have to do something that people tell us to do, at least if you're white and middle class. And so figuring out how to connect with people and to help people get drawn in to do things together towards a world that has more compassion and more fairness in it becomes a bit of a challenge at a time when people say, nobody needs to tell me what to do. I don't trust institutions. I don't really need to go out to do anything else, and no one's going to make me. Right? So how do you deal with that? So that brings us to kind of more of the current things that are underway. There's an African saying that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And ethical culture is a go-together kind of movement. Right? The idea in ethical culture is that you're always looking for ways to connect with others. And that the things that you do are done together in some ways. Maybe not everyone doing all the same thing all the time, but that you always have a sense of companions around you somehow when you're at work. And part of that is like the smallest ethical unit is two anyway, right? You don't have ethics if you don't have at least two parties involved here. But the larger picture is that there's an awareness that in our communities we produce an environment of sorts, an environment of connection, an environment of support that we can rely on to help us be the kind of people that we are looking to be, right? To help us do the kind of things that we think are important to do with the support of other folks around us. And so we can learn together, we can act together, we can suffer together, you know, all these kind of things that help us draw into this feeling of community of people that care and care about each other and also care about what's going on in the world at large. Now, to support that at a time when congregations are struggling means that we have to be a little bit more creative in terms of the ways that we make things available. Hello, welcome. And so we've been working hard to harness technology as a first step. You know, we have 24 ethical societies spread across the continent. In order to get our work done, we've been doing much more video conferencing, and so we have small groups that meet over the internet, basically, where we can work and plan and do a variety of things, and then have fewer meetings face-to-face, but enough meetings face-to-face that we still know who each other are and get things done. And then we've also been looking to work on different aspects of what groups need. So the two areas that we find that are most needed for ethical societies in the country right now are more societies in more places, In other words, if you have 24 societies in the United States, that means most of your major cities don't have ethical societies, right? What's with that? So we'd like to see more ethical societies happen in more places. And the other way is to look at us in terms of, for each society, how well are we doing in terms of our demographic reach? You know, what is the constellation of people that we connect with and that we are helpful in engaging with? And meeting the needs. And so part of our effort is to get a better handle on the varying needs of various demographic groups so that we have a better handle on the kind of things that we might do that would be appealing and helpful. Right? So there's kind of a study underway right now, as a matter of fact, to get a better handle on that so that we can then devise programming for local societies to utilize to help reach out more and to connect better. We also, for the other side about planting new societies, we've just started a new society development team that will be researching markets that will be potential places for ethical societies to go. Other pieces for local societies work. We do find that societies are often finding a need for more support on programming and having more people come in to do speaking and things along those lines. So we have a program now called the Visiting Leaders Bureau. And in fact, I'm a product of that, and I think your next speaker, James, is also a product of that. And so this is the way that the union has of sending people to ethical societies at an affordable rate. And it's something that the union is helping to finance to make it possible for all concerned. So it makes it good for the leaders to go. It also makes it great for the societies to be able to see more people say more things about ethical culture. And so we're working at it that way. And we're looking to continue to expand that program so that there's more people available and they can do more things when they come out. We also have, the American Ethical Union has been training professional leaders for its entire existence. And that is kind of almost a combination independent study program and mutual support program where we have candidates come through the system and they work through a whole bunch of modules, training modules, and do internships, and then ultimately, with success, get certified as professional leaders like myself. We're now realizing that we need to have much more flexibility in that kind of education because fewer people are available to just take 3 years out of their lives to do a course of study to become a professional ethical leader. So we're working towards a more open, structured system so that people who are interested in ethical culture, and don't know if they really would want to be an ethical culture leader or not, but are interested in the things that ethical culture does, can start taking the training modules. And hopefully societies will benefit from that, from people on the ground having these exposure to these materials and these capacities. And for those people who actually decide that they would like to become a professional leader, they can also get kind of credits along the way towards that goal as well. But this also gives us the opportunity to expand the kind of things that we do training about. You know, so if the world around us is different, and if people are needing different kinds of programming to make sense to them, let's do more training to help the societies do that training and sort of thing, or do those kind of programs. So those are pieces that we're already working out. The last piece, the second to last piece has to do with ways to reach a larger world. So one of the great things about technology is you can do so much with it, and it's just about free, right? In fact, just this morning, we saw a Facebook live feed from our home society. You know, it cost them nothing to have a live broadcast from their very shores of what was going on at the Ethical Society this morning. It was so cool to be able to see that. Everybody's doing it. So now, even though you have these great things you can do, the chances of being seen doing it have actually diminished because there's so many things happening in so many places that it's difficult to stand out. So another initiative that the union is looking into is actually public relations work. How do you help establish a stream so that when you have things coming up, there are news outlets and other things awaiting to kind of promote what you're doing and to connect. The New York Society's been doing this for a while and has come up with what they think is really great success. we're looking into utilizing that for our next assembly, which is just 5 months away, as a way to help generate more buzz and more awareness. Because I don't know if you find this. How many of you knew about an ethical society before you came here? Oh, almost nobody. Okay, so now you see kind of the extent of the problem. For those people who even here don't know about it, that is common across the world. You tell somebody, oh, I go to an ethical society, most likely thing you'll hear next is, what is that? Right? So finding more ways to be out in the world as a known entity is a really important part of our extending our influence. The last piece has to do with money. And so one of the things that is also often true is that people wrestle with the notion of what it means to contribute financially to organizations like ethical society. And part of that, I'm sure, comes from people's experience of other religious bodies that might tithe or have fairly extensive expectations on what people contribute to their organization. On the other end of it, the truth of the matter is congregations are kind of expensive things to operate. So trying to figure out how to be encouraging for people to really participate financially, and also how to help grow that in a way that doesn't lead people to feel like, you're just asking me to be here so you can hit me up for money, is its own challenge. And so one of the things that we're working on now is ways to present the things that we're doing alongside the kind of the understanding that these are resources that really would be better if they could be better supported. So if you're wondering for yourself, what could I do to be helpful financially to the American Ethical Union? My first answer is support your local society. Right? The largest contribution to the American Ethical Union is actually the apportionment that societies contribute to our operating expense. But to get beyond the apportionment amount, that helps us keep our ground stable. If we're to grow and do more and more cool things, we're going to need more capital to do that. So if you can also see yourself free to contribute more directly to the union, encourage your friends to do so, that actually does give us a much better opportunity to do more in this world. And the more things we do for everyone else also comes back to your local society as well. So the main thing is we'd like to make everything available to everyone when we can. So those are the kind of the pieces that we're working on right now. So let me kind of bring myself to a close here. And if I can find the closing. Oh, here we go. So in the end, as the psychologist Alfred Adler noted, it's easier to fight for one's principles than to live up to them. And real moral progress for society requires commitment and determined effort by many, many people over the course of many, many generations. And that's no mean feat, to be sure. And as a long journey, we cannot do it alone, but must instead find ways to travel together. To travel with others and to influence others toward eliciting the best of the people they come across. The American Ethical Union stands ready with your help to do what can be done. We've only been at it for about 140 years, so we should give ourselves some slack, but not too much. There's lots to be done, and it's best for us all to get to work. Thank you.
Are we going to take questions now?
Sure.
Oh, sure. You don't. Yeah, I think that would be
Okay.
well received. If are there questions for Bart? Anne's got one.
Yeah.
I would like to know if you had more money in the headquarters,
Yeah.
what would be your projects? What kind of things are you?
Outside of the hot tub?
Okay.
The first project actually I would think would the two projects I talked about, the New Society Development Team and also the consultation program for societies extending their demographics. Those are two areas where I think we would benefit the most from an infusion of external information. Our track record of starting new societies is not terrific, shall we say, and our track record of reaching an extended demographic also not terrific. So I think those are areas where if we had more capital that we could bring in people that are really good with this stuff, that would be a help for sure.
Question. So you described some of the history and the early things that the society had done, which was very impressive. And then you asked the question, what are we doing now? And I guess I'm not sure that I got the answer to that question.
Okay, yeah.
What is it that...
So, you know, one of the, I like to encourage societies to look at their activity in terms of what they do for in-reach, outreach, and service. Where in-reach is, you know, how they organize themselves to be good to each other and to have interesting things going on, et cetera. And outreach is how well they reach out to a larger world around them. But service is how they interact with the greater world to try to promote more justice and compassion. And so on that last end, first of all, you know, a lot of those things do kind of work together, but for a lot of societies, they do have a strong focus on social justice matters and social caring activities. So the social justice matters are really looking at ways that they can try to address the root causes of injustices. So like last summer, we passed the resolution around repairing the harm of racism. Right, and that repairing the harm of racism, and that calls upon societies to really look more deeply into what's going on that has resulted in the structural racism that we see so damaging to the world around us, and what are the kind of things that we might do to try to interrupt the bad things happening and to promote better things going on. Right, so societies are often joining up with other groups that have similar ideas there, or doing their own study groups, that sort of thing, to work towards that end. And a lot of work with showing up for racial justice, or with the Black Lives Matter efforts in various places. So that's one of the areas that would be like a social justice kind of one. Social caring end has to do with things that you do to provide direct care to other people. So a lot of societies will have things like clothing drives or food drives or other kind of things to try to help assuage some of the injuries that people have suffered already. Is that closer to the question?
I think so.
It's more piecemeal than organized nationally. You know, so that's kind of the reality of the world that we live in, is each community has their own things that they're working on. We have a couple of major themes, you know, so the climate and racial justice are probably the two prominent themes that you would see being addressed in society these days.
Bart, thank you for your talk, by the way. I've often wondered, kind of wrestled with the idea of kind of taking a bigger picture, actually a very big picture, very small picture. The big picture is, you think, well, let me take the small picture. Are there any metrics for determining how either individuals or large groups, including the planet, kind of a meter on how ethical people are, how good they are? And that's a small picture.
I like
the big
this.
picture is,
I think Alexa could do it.
the big picture, in 140 years, you know, we've had some major, terrible, horrible world wars.
Mm-hmm.
Are we generally making progress? Are there any ways of looking, you know, any metrics to look at if people are becoming more ethic? Does technology help us become? Does education, does rising income, do those things help us? Are there any ways of looking at that? You know, because sometimes you look and it looks, there's a lot of despair. Other times,
Sure,
if you take the bigger picture, it looks like we're getting better. I'm just wondering if your societies come up with any metrics or any ways of quantifying how we're doing.
Stephen Pinker had a book a couple years back, Better Angels of Our Nature,
Yes.
which really looked at how, to his mind, there was an overall massive reduction in violence over the course of many generations. I think that played a little bit better for me before November, to be honest, or even a few months before November. I'm not clear for myself. I think we tend to fool ourselves into thinking we're better than we are and better off than we are, and would benefit from a stronger dose of reality around that, probably. You know, sadly. Right now, I'm in the course of study. The Humanist Institute has a class coming up on anti-Black Blackness and Humanism, just in a couple weeks. And so there's 4 tomes that I'm working my way through, and it's just devastating to actually see even our recent history. So yeah, it gives me real pause about being overly optimistic about how great we are. On the other end, I've seen people in action, and I've seen the good things that people are capable of. So I can't give up hope either. I'm not too sure I'm ready to measure it.
Any other questions, comments, reflections on what Bart has been telling us? So the theme for the assembly 5 months from now is the environment.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, environmental justice.
Okay.
And we'll be looking at especially how environmental issues more severely impact vulnerable populations than the general population, and also look at how to try to work on some of the social justice issues that go with efforts to work on the environment. We're going to be in Albuquerque, New Mexico, so we are hoping to have also a much stronger capacity to learn more and connect more with the Native American world around this, and which of course are people that have realized the downside of a lot of environmental efforts, degradation issues rather, as well as other groups. So it should be a lively time.
What is an assembly?
When?
What is assembly?
Oh, assembly is the national conference for American Ethical Union. So all the ethical societies are invited to send delegates, and also to send other people who are interested in learning more about more about the topic, or more about some of the organizational development kind of ideas that we're throwing around, because we have a bunch of workshops that happen as well. And then there's the assembly itself is actually the meeting of the Society of Representatives, and they vote in a new board, and they vote for resolutions and bylaw changes, the budget, that sort of thing.
One quick, you mentioned that ethical culture was involved in the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. Is that really? I didn't know.
That's what it said in the book. I haven't been able to really unpack that all the way, but it's in keeping with kind of where they were at.
So what presence will ethical culture have at the Parliament of World Religions this year in Toronto?
I'm not sure. Ann Clayson has been going for several years, so it wouldn't surprise me if she goes.
Yeah, I've been.
Oh, okay.
We're going, yeah.
So there we go. So we have Ann and you.
Love to see a proposal from AU for one of the workshops.
Great.
I'm sure Ann's in on that.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk to Ann, if the
Yeah.
two of you are.
Yeah, you might want to send her a line asking what she's planning on doing.
Ann Clayson is a leader in New York for people
Yeah.
throwing
Yeah, sorry,
around some
yes.
names that people aren't going to know. So maybe just
Thank you.
say who they are.
Guess or something.
Yeah. Good.
Talking stuff. Of course, Ann.
And Bart, really quickly, I'd like to humbly offer an expanded version of what ethics are. You had mentioned minimum requires 2 people. As a thought experiment, I would say if you were a hermit, you have a responsibility to act ethically wherever you live, in the environment you're at, with animals, with biomass, whatever, everything.
Yeah.
You can choose to act different ways.
Yeah.
So I'd expand that. I would submit, possibly you could expand ethics to include how we treat the environment.
I'm happy to include that gloss on my thing. And the main thing is to note that it involves more than just oneself.
Yes. Yes.
It's not an individual effort. It's an effort that involves others. Whether those others are rocks that, or people or animals or whatever.
Even rocks.
Yeah. I'm inclined to I like connected with rocks. I don't know what.
So you mentioned how at the assembly last year, the theme was racial justice and repairing the harm of racism, and the resolution that was passed, and so I kind of appreciate that the AEU has sort of corralled or taken a leadership role. You know, you say, okay, this is going to be our theme, and then everyone who comes to assembly is exposed to that theme and challenged through the workshops, you know, to do things. There was a very interesting workshop on showing up for racial justice.
Okay.
The surge thing. Our group here has not plunged into, I think I told you this before, not really plunged into that theme for our ethical action stuff, at least not yet. After the march yesterday, there was a table by a local surge chapter showing up for racial justice, you know, which is basically what affluent white people can do without interfering and messing things up to assist organizations, you know, of black or other minority folks in their struggle for justice. And I was thinking, hey, surge, I probably wouldn't have heard of it, you know, if it hadn't been for the AEU assembly and a central campaign, you know, that was driven out of that. And I guess I'm leading up to a question: was how has that played out? You know, all the societies were kind of challenged by that initiative, and I know many of them are conducting action campaigns, you know, and participating in surge. And you also mentioned another, well, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
So could you comment briefly on how that's going?
Sure. So we did have a webinar on that topic a couple months back, and that was looking at what societies are currently doing. And so you can actually find that webinar on our resource page, or I can get that to you anyway. And out of that, we learned that there are a number of people that were interested in having further conversations. And so there are online conversations happening every month that people can just sign in for. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy to give that information. That way you get to present and to hear what's going on. Yeah, I can say for many societies, they're heavy into the study and understanding phase of it. You know, since white privilege tends to make it more difficult to appreciate what a life without privilege is like. It is a real growth area for many people. So lots of societies are showing films like 13th. The James Bond with I'm Not Your Negro. The color, what's the one? There's a whole slew of very, very strong and powerful movies that are worth viewing. Reading books like The New Jim Crow and a number of more recent ones as well, and getting themselves educated about things as a way to get started, and then figuring out ways to connect with groups locally. I know our group has strong connections on the police end of it. We're looking for police reform efforts, and also on the housing end, because there's lots of housing segregation in our neighborhoods. So the two primary areas that we've been focusing on.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Bart. It's great. Did I miss a hand? No. Okay. Let's give this one a hand.